Hey guys, it's Jeremy here at Metal Music Meltdown, back with another video. What we have for today, guys, is something a little bit different. I wanted to start a new series on the channel, so this is going to be my top 20 albums of each subgenre of metal. And I figured which better subgenre to start with than the mighty thrash metal. It's my favorite subgenre since I got into metal. So many iconic bands and iconic albums. This was probably the easiest one to do for me because I know all the classic albums like the back of my hand. But also it's very difficult because there's such an array of monstrous, legendary albums that it's hard to narrow it down to just 20. So I had to leave a lot of ones off, and I'll name a couple in the honorable mentions at the end. And I also tried not to duplicate a band. Like, I only wanted to have one album per band, but there is one band I have on here twice. But otherwise, they're all different. And like I said, the majority of my albums are from the 80s, the heyday of thrash. But there is a couple albums on here that might surprise you that are more modern. One's from 2010, I think. One's from like 2017. One's from like 2012 or something like that. So stay tuned for those. Most might be a little bit shocking, but it's on my list. And there's a lot of bands I had to leave out, like some newer bands like Havoc and Warbringer, and bands I really love. But when you really compare their top material to the classic bands, it's still, the quality's not quite as good. Like, it's still not as good as the other bands. And I just have a lot more history with the other albums as well, so it makes a big difference as well. So let's jump right in, guys. So the video's not crazy long. I'm not going to say too much about each album, maybe a couple standout tracks, and for the order, for the most part, is pretty accurate, but there's a couple that could be interchanged. They're like pretty much identical in quality, but I had to put them in an order, so it is what it is. So number 20, I have Terminal Redux by Vector. It's their third studio album, American band. I put this on the list at the bottom just because they really took thrash in a different way. Went really spacey and really kind of progressive with it. I really like the technicality of this album, and it's just a really good album. Easily my favorite from the band. And yeah, from 2016, killer album, always loved it. Number 19, I went with the debut album from Forbidden Evil. Love this album, easily their favorite, my favorite of the band overall. And standout tracks would be Off the Edge, March into Fire, and Feel No Pain are really good as well. Had to make the list. One of my favorite albums of all time. At number 18, I went with Flotsam and Jetsam's debut album, Doomsday of the Deceiver. Really cool band. This is when Newsted was in the band for bass, and they actually heard him. But this has always been my favorite Flotsam album. I really like this band. They have a different sound. They have a lot more melody in the vocals and the music in general compared to other thrash bands of its time. So I really like their sound. It's a little bit different, and I love this album. At number 17, I went with Destruction's debut, German Thrashers, Infernal Overkill. Probably my favorite Destruction album of all time. I had to make the list with Invincible Force, Death Trap, The Ritual, Tormentor, just some really classic tunes on here that they still play in their set today. Really good album. At number 16, I went with Overkill, and this might surprise you, the album I picked, but I went with Ironbound. Many times this is my favorite Overkill album. Some people might have gone with their earlier stuff, Scope, or the debut, but this has always been, I think, my favorite Overkill album. I just love it. I listen to it probably to go back to it the most. I love the title track. It's one of my favorite Overkill songs. Give a Little, Bring Me the Night, The Green and Black, just really killer album. Love this album. One of my favorites, again, of all time. At number 15, I went with the debut from Death Angel, The Ultraviolence. Killer debut. These guys were only like 15 and 16 when they made this record. Really good guitar playing. Really raw sounding album, but really impressive album, especially considering how old the guys were. And Death Angel is criminally underrated in the thrash scene, and they've always have been. People know them, but they should be up in discussion with like Exodus and all the other bands. Like, they're just as good. And live, I think they're better than most of the big bands ahead of them. They always kill it live. One of my favorite bands I see live of all time. And the next one here, we got number 14, the debut album from Holy Grail. This might be a shocker to some people, but Crisis in Utopia. Ever since I first heard this album, I fell in love with it right away. One of my favorite vocalists in the thrash genre of all time. And with songs like Fight to Kill, My Last Attack, Call of Valhalla, the title track, this album kicks so much ass, it's not even funny. I was going to put it even a little bit higher, but when I looked at the other stuff, I'm like, no, can't put it too high. If you're not familiar with this album, please check it out. You won't be disappointed. Just a balls out thrash and heavy metal. Really good stuff. Next, I went with number 13. I went with Darkness Descends from Dark Angel. Again, their second studio album, easily my favorite from the band. Gene Hoglan on this is a beast. The drumming is ridiculous. Just brutal, fast playing and intensity on this album, and had to make the list. It's an all-time classic. At number 12, I went with the second studio album from German thrashers Creator. Everyone knows this album. Not quite as raw as the initial one, a little bit more refined, bit better songwriting, better production than the debut. That's why I think it's better personally. And just so many iconic tracks on this one as well. It's an all-time classic and it had to make the list. Next one's kind of the same thing. Number 11, I had to go with Agent Orange by Sodom. Again, everyone knows this album. It's their third studio album. Again, they kind of refined their sound and just had a really good balls-out thrash album. Their first two albums were kind of more black metal and really raw sounding, but this one they kind of dialed it in and had a really just a balls-out thrash album, and it fucking kills. And honestly, I was debating on putting their newest album, Genesis 19, because I love that new album so much. It's competitive with Agent Orange. It's that good in my opinion, but I had to put the classic on here just because it's Agent Orange and it's a classic. At number 9, I think we're at. Or 10, I think 10. Anthrax, my favorite album from Anthrax, Among the Living. Not another big surprise here. Most of my albums are, the list on this one are pretty predictable, I guess. They're kind of the albums that most people kind of pick from the bands, but they're legendary albums for a reason. And this is probably my favorite Anthrax album. It was tough to leave out Spreading the Disease and the debut, Fistful of Metal, but I think this one's probably their best overall in terms of quality and songwriting, so it had to make the list. And number 9, the debut album from Canadian thrashers, Annihilator with Alice in Hell. My favorite album from these guys as well. Their second album, Never Neverland, is really iconic as well, but Jeff Waters' guitar playing is legendary. Good riff master all over the place, crazy solos, and just a really killer band. Super underrated, and don't sleep on their later material because it's just as good, a lot of it, as the early stuff. But Alice in Hell has always been my favorite album by them. And the next one here, number 8, I went with the third studio album from Sepultura, Beneath the Remains. Always been my favorite Sepultura album. Arise was another contender. Those are kind of the most thrashiest albums from their catalog. Later on, they got kind of more new metal sounding in a way, and some death metal elements on some of their earlier stuff. But I think those two are the most thrashy, and Beneath the Remains is just a ridiculous album, and it kills, and it had to make my list. Love Max and the Boys, and Sepultura kicks ass. Number 7, I went with Metallica, Master of Puppets. Killer album. This needs really no introduction. This is the one band that made my list twice. Not my favorite Metallica album, that's why it's a little bit lower. And some people might be surprised that it's this low on an all-time list. But there's just other albums from bands I really like that are just iconic, and I just love those albums. And there's just another Metallica album I like more than Master of Puppets. So I put the other one, Master of Puppets, a little bit lower. But come on, with songs like Battery, Master of Puppets, Sanitarium, Leper and Messiah, The Thing That Should Not Be, like, it's top to bottom, it's a masterpiece, and everyone loves Master of Puppets. It's like a no-brainer. At number 6, I went with the debut album from Exodus, Bonded by Blood. Doesn't get more classic thrash than this. Paul Bailoff's vocals are one of a kind. He's like the sickest, the craziest frontman I've ever seen footage on. I never got to see them live, unfortunately, but Paul Bailoff is a madman. He's a crazy and perfect vocalist for this album. Not the most technically vocal singer, but He was just a crazy guy, and he exuded thrash metal in its spirit. And of course, Gary Holt is a riff master and one of my favorite guitarists in thrash as well. Had to make the top part of my list. At number 5, I went with probably my favorite thrash band of all time, Testament, and my favorite album by them, The New Order. I have done a ranking of the albums for Testament already, so definitely check that out if you haven't already. But yeah, this is just full of classic tracks, top to bottom, with Trial by Fire, Into the Pit, Disciples of the Watch is fucking brutal, A Day of Reckoning, just top to bottom. It's a killer album, all hits, and a lot of songs they still play in their set list today. Had to make the top part of my list. Number 4, and again, no brainer here, Rain in Blood by Slayer. It had to make the list. I know it's probably predictable and whatever, but come on guys, it's fucking Rain in Blood. What more do you need to say? With songs like Angel of Death, Necrophobic, Altar of Sacrifice, Jesus Saves, the title track, of course, Criminally Insane. It's a masterpiece, 29 minutes of pure speed and aggression, and it's incredible. This one might be the shocker for a lot of people, being number 3 on my list, but Power Trip, Nightmare Logic, released in 2017, is their second studio album. They're a crossover hardcore punk thrash band. Most of the albums I tried to stick to were pure thrash, but this is one exception for me because this album kicks so much ass. It's always been it's a top 10 album of all time for me, not just in thrash, but in metal in general. And I had to make the top part of my list. If you don't agree with me, come fight me that I think it's better than Rain in Blood. But I listen to this album like 3 or 4 times a week, like all the time. It's so good. I never get sick of it. Love Riley's vocals. They're so angry and aggressive. Love the simple and heavy riff, so crunchy and infectious. Like, it's a masterpiece. Love this album. And the last 2 are, again, pretty predictable, but number 2, I went with Rust in Peace by Megadeth. Easy by a mile, their best album. It's always been my favorite Megadeth album. Holy Wars is a top 3 or 4 thrash metal song for me. Hangar 18's really good. Tornado of Souls. Take No Prisoners. The title track, Dawn Patrol. Like, it's just a really good album. Their masterpiece for sure. It's their like Master of Puppets, or it's a masterpiece from Megadeth. I'm not even the biggest Megadeth fan, to be honest, but there's no denying this album's greatness, and it had to make the top of the list. And number 1, I went with the band I've had on here twice, Metallica, with Ride the Lightning. It's been my favorite Metallica album since I heard it, and I put it at number 1 because I just have so much history with the album and the impact it had on me to venture off and to search out other bands like Testament and Slayer and Exodus, and I got into all the other bands from this album. Still, I listen to this album all the time. It never loses its potency. Come on, guys. Fight Fire with Fire, Ride the Lightning, For Whom the Bell Tolls, Fade to Black, Trapped Under Ice. Creeping Death is my favorite Metallica song of all time. Had to put it at number 1. It's iconic. It's greatest hits from top to bottom, and it's a masterpiece. So guys, that's my top 20 thrash albums of all time. Some audible mentions quickly that I didn't leave in. I could have put And Justice for All or Kill 'Em All from Metallica would have been the contenders. From Slayer, Hell Awaits was another one I barely left off. Love that album a lot too. Exodus, there was only Bonded by Blood that really came to my mind to put on there, to be honest. Testament, I could have put The Legacy on there. That was a contender as well. Or The Gathering was a big one as well. And like the debut from Toxic was another one. I didn't put Artillery on here. There's just a lot of bands I could have put on that I just didn't have room for. And some newer bands like Havoc, Warbringer, the newer wave of bands that came out. But this is what I came up with based on what I kind of listened to the most. And let me know down below, guys, what your top 20 picks of all time would be. And I'll be doing more of these. I'll be doing like new wave of British heavy metal list, a death metal list, a prog metal list. I don't think I'll do black metal because I'm not into that subgenre, so I don't really have enough knowledge about it to really pick 20 albums, to be honest. But I'll do subgenres I'm familiar with, like power metal, the ones I kind of know more about, the new wave of traditional heavy metal, things like that. Doom metal as well. So thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned for more great content, and until next time, Keep it metal.